Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening as the case may be. My name is Tina Peralta, and I work as Program Executive for Economic and Ecological Justice at the World Council of Churches. The WCC is a fellowship of over 350 churches around the world, and it is based in Geneva. So again, a literally warm welcome because it's over 33 degrees Celsius here at the moment. To everyone, including those who have joined us, not just through Zoom, but also through Facebook and YouTube. So a warm welcome to this webinar titled For Life, Not Profit, Churches as Alternative Economic Actors and Spaces. I think a few house rules first. If you are not speaking, grateful if you could mute your microphones. That will enable us to have a relatively disturbance-free call. And if you are speaking, obviously, please remember to turn on your microphone. So this webinar is the third in a series titled Churches on the Road to an Economy of Life and Ecological Justice. And the series is inspired by a particular resource, this one, which is the roadmap for congregations, communities, and churches for an economy of life and ecological justice. The previous webinars, we've had two before this. I'm not sure if many of you were able to join them, but the two previous webinars clearly highlighted some features of the deeply dysfunctional and broken economic and financial system that we currently have. And so the previous webinars, for instance, reflected on the commodification and even financialization of water and land. The previous webinars also dwelled on the issue of overconsumption of resources, particularly of a wealthy sector of society, and often at the expense of other people and ecology. The previous webinars also touched on the unprecedented and also scandalous levels of inequality that we are witnessing today. But on top of that, there is also what we could call a culture of money and profit making that is seeping into many spheres, from politics to areas such as health, education, and also even religion. So churches are many things, but churches are also economic agents. Churches can and ought to be spaces of respite, but also spaces of resistance and alternatives. Churches are often consumers. Sometimes churches are also producers. Churches have pension funds, have assets such as land, buildings, and other resources. So the question this webinar will be addressing today is how we as churches can be alternative communities promoting economies of life, including in our day-to-day operations. So in a moment, we will be hearing about concrete examples of how churches are already participating in and building community-rooted, life-giving economic and financial practices. In particular, we will hear about how churches can engage in faith-rooted investments in just and sustainable activities, how churches can work together with the communities that they are embedded in to steer microcredit and credit unions towards bettering lives, how churches can be welcoming spaces for the socioeconomically disenfranchised, and particularly migrants, and also how churches can support and also learn from alternative economic organizations, such as cooperatives, that can be welcoming, that ensure dignified livelihoods. So with this introduction, I will now hand over the invisible mic, so to speak, to my colleague, Annalise, who will present the methodology of this webinar, as well as help facilitate the introduction of our resource persons. So over to you, Annalise.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Annalise Eclipse. I'm a rising junior at Cornell University and an intern for the World Council of Churches. I will be a moderator today, so let me briefly explain how this webinar will proceed. Today's event will consist of 4 rounds of input. In the first round, our speakers will have about 3 to 4 minutes to share examples of how churches and faith-based organizations are participating in and promoting life-giving economic practices. In the second round, our speakers will have 3 to 4 minutes to share the challenges they've encountered in their work, as well as what inspires them and important lessons they've learned. In the third round, we will have a 25-minute Q&A session. We have already received some great questions from participants during the registration process. But if you have another question you would like to ask the speakers, please post in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live. We will try to respond to as many as we can. In order to inspire a lively discussion, I will bring 2 or 3 questions at a time to the attention of the speakers. And lastly, in the fourth round, our speakers will share their final thoughts and key takeaways for everyone in the audience. Athena and I will then conclude the webinar. And now, it is time to introduce our wonderful speakers. So, Nana, would you like to start us off by briefly introducing yourself and your work with Faith Invest?
Thank you, Annalise. Hello, everyone. I'm Nana Francois. I support membership at Faith Invest. And Faith Invest is a nonprofit that works with many faiths across the globe to help them align their values to their investments. In terms of my personal journey, I had quite a typical corporate upbringing, worked in an asset management company, management consultant company, as bad as investment banking, as bad as corporate strategy, but I made the move to Faith Invest at the end of last year, because having worked both in London and especially in Johannesburg, I really saw the difference that a personal involvement, placing your investments where you can make a difference. I saw how that makes a difference, how it really makes a change. I was inspired by the mission of Faith Invest to do that on a great scale, collaborating with many partners. And I'm excited to be part of this venture today. I mean, partnership is one of the key ways in which we can actually come together to resist and to make a change and to make a different system work better for all. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nana. Okay, for our next speaker, Rob, could you briefly introduce yourself and your role at the Presbyterian Church?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you all today. My name is Rob Four. I'm the director of staff. The main part of my job is to be the lead staff person for the Presbyterian Church's Committee on Mission Responsibility Through Investment, which is about to enter its 50th year. So the PCUSA has been doing this work for almost half a century, which is looking at their responsible investing policies. Our committee recommends policy and implements policy from our General Assembly, our highest governing body. And that policy is implemented through the investing agencies related to the Presbyterian Church USA, which is our pension fund and our foundation. And I look forward to talking a little bit more about our work later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, so now on to our next speaker. Reverend Yusuf, would you please introduce yourself and a little bit about your work with the foundation?
Thank you, Annalise. Good evening to all of us. I'm Reverend Yusuf Tarigan. I'm an ordinary pastor in Karubatak Protestant Church. People call it GBKP in our context. I work for Community Development Service. GBKP, we call Ateklang Foundation, a foundation in North Sumatra, which has 170 groups of community with about total 45,000 people members who work together, fight for their right in social, political, economy, and ecology. I'm very happy to join this webinar. Thank you for Athena Peralta who gave me chance to this webinar, and thank you for all of the team WCC. And thank you, and very glad to see you all of the speakers together with this webinar. This very special opportunity to me to sharing my experience for all of us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend. So Cynthia, would you like to briefly introduce yourself and your work with the Mission for Migrant Workers?
Thank you, Annalise. Yes, hello, everyone. Let me start by telling you a story, but not my story. It's Erwiana. Erwiana is an Indonesian who was employed as a domestic worker and heavily tortured here in Hong Kong. 2 slices of bread and 1 liter of water a day, 4 hours of sleep, 20 long hours of continuous work without sitting down. For every mistake was a punishment, from hair pulling to head banging on walls. There were more severe punishments. Once, a metal vacuum, tube of a vacuum cleaner was pushed to her mouth that damaged her teeth and gums. One winter day, she made a mistake and was pushed to the bathroom. Stripped naked, employer poured cold water on her in front of a full blast electric fan. By the 9th month, she could hardly move her body. Employer put makeup on her, put 6 layers of clothes with 65 Hong Kong dollars in her pocket, quietly took her not to the hospital, but to the airport. We assisted Erwiana through the whole process of getting justice for her, guided her and her family through the many paperwork, medical checkup, temporary shelter while the case was going on. It got huge media attention. Eventually, the employer had a prison sentence. While Erwiana is one of the extreme cases, there are women who are abused but leave no physical mark. They too need support. And all this is happening in a place like Hong Kong. The question is, should they even have to happen and where? My name is Cynthia Adon Pelias. What was originally planned as a 2 to 3 years stint in Hong Kong setting up a mission for Filipino migrant workers ended up spending 4 decades of continuing the work, continuing to be engaged and challenged. You see, from 1980 onwards, women from the Philippines in thousands and eventually tens of thousands, now also among Indonesians, started to go overseas, but not to the original place, which was the United States of America, but to the neighboring Asian countries to do odd jobs, domestic work, factory work, entertainment, and even arranged marriages that we call now marriage migration. Hong Kong was one of the destinations here as domestic workers. The mission was established at the Holy Carpenter Church on March 3, 1981, an initiative of the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, and the Resource Center for Philippine Concerns is a documentation outfit documenting human rights violations in the Philippines at that time. St. John's Cathedral, which is an Anglican cathedral, took a very significant role in offering their space and taking us in as one of their outreach ministries. 5 years later, the Bethune House Migrant Women's Refuge was also established in the then upper portion of a Kowloon Union Church, Mans. That's another church. As a gesture of gratitude, our shelter residents will join the annual cleaning of the churches. Our 4 decades of work with migrant domestic workers will not be made easier without the support of these churches that provided real sanctuary.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Okay, on to our next speaker, Pastor Kakai. Could you please introduce yourself and your work with the Union Theological Seminary and a Metropolitan Community Church?
Hello, everyone. I should have asked me to go first. How can I follow that introduction? My name is Kakai Pamaran. I serve in Union Theological Seminary here in Dasmariñas, Cavite, the Republic of the Philippines. I was previously the coordinator of the Field Education Office, but now I've been recently appointed to be director for communications in the era of pandemic. I used to serve as pastor to Metropolitan Community Church before coming full-time in seminary. And that's it.
So thank you so much again to our resource persons. And some of you have already started to tell the story of your work, and we're grateful for this. So now we begin more properly, and let's start with Nana. Nana, can you tell us a bit more about Faith Invest, and specifically how Faith Invest can help, or in fact is already helping churches, for instance, align their investments with their values?
Thanks, Athena. Yes, I can. So Faith Invest is a relatively new venture, but that's come out of a long legacy. We're born out of the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, where many different faiths came together to make statements of commitment to the environment, to doing better. And Faith Invest took those commitments and broader commitments and said, how can we actually help these organizations, not just to state the commitments, but to act on the commitments? So we're there to grow the scale and impact of faith-consistent investing. We grow the scale by getting members together, that's individual organizations who want to actually shift their capital into a more faith-aligned way. And then we grow the impact by getting many different voices and working with partners and both faithful and secular players to share the message, and actually to not just share the message, but talk about the stories and the actions and the achievements that have been done in the name of being more aligned. So very specifically, what do? We see that the faiths have an advantage over a lot of the other values-based efforts that are going on today. We have our books, we have our traditions, we have our teachings, we have long legacies of actually doing what it is that we're trying to practice today. And so Faith Invest works alongside the organizations to say, let's go back to your traditions. Let's see what's discouraged. And the divestment movement is very strong already. But let's also see what's encouraged. Let's see what we can proactively invest in. Let's see what we're taught about how to give effectively, how to reap without exploitation, how to plan, which is a form of investment, which is doing something today with a view to having a certain result tomorrow. And we see that foundation is very important, from the most experienced to the least experienced practitioner, because that helps to give a real guide as to what you want to do. And it helps to help us build those bridges between those who have an ambition and those who have the expertise and the skills, who may be in your own faith tradition or they may be outside of that. So very specifically, if we come back to giving, one of the things that we are working on launching is an entrepreneurship program, starting in partnership with both the UNDP and as part of the Laudato Si program from the Vatican. It says that it basically sees that many of us give to organizations which could potentially transform to be more sustainable, to be more like businesses. And even in your generosity, that form of giving could become a form of investment in your community where you're rooted to really make a difference. And that's something that we are really trying to build and encourage and grow, not only with the Catholic faith, but also with other Christian traditions and other traditions more broadly. We also see that for many who have been on this faith-aligned journey for a while, they're wanting to say, what's new? What are the new opportunities? So we help to get groups of people together, cohorts of people together to create and talk about those new opportunities. And maybe even to say there should be a different model. Maybe we need to appreciate that in our sector, it's about the stakeholders, not the shareholders. It's about the whole community. And maybe actually we need to be confident as churches and as faiths to go to the traditional markets and say, this is actually what we need and what we want to be getting out of what we're doing. So in those particular ways, Faith Invest is really trying to be a partner, to be a bridge. It's interesting in the sense that faith organizations are often quiet to talk about it, but there is a growing recognition of what they are doing. And actually you're finding the secular organizations, your World Banks, etc., are coming and saying, we see there is a group of organizations who are so rooted in something that it's making them see the world differently. It's making them act differently. How can we learn from their story as well? I mean, when we talk about challenges, opportunities, maybe I'll talk a bit more about that. But for now, that's what I want to share about how we work. We start from the foundations and then we find the best way to align with your best next move.
Thanks so much, Nana, for that input. And in fact, we also have with us Rob from PCUSA. And Rob, if you could share with us more concretely then about PCUSA's mission responsibility through investment initiative, which very much links up to what Nana had also shared previously.
Thank you, Athena. Yes, and Marcel, I don't know if you can share my PowerPoint. We can go. I've got a couple slides to kind of guide our conversation here. So, yes, again, the mission responsibility through investment project of the PCUSA is nearly in its 50th year, and the whole idea of the work of this committee and the work of us kind of writ large in the shareholder engagement space is kind of flows from the tradition, the Reformed tradition, the Reformed Christian tradition that has the idea that through our faith we witness to secular societal institutions, be it government, public education, public health, or publicly traded corporations, which are sadly some of the most powerful institutions on the planet. So we kind of, the committee are really the ambassadors of the Presbyterian Church USA's values to these major, these very powerful actors in our world. Next slide, please. Marcelo, thank you. So these are the goals that the committee was established with, the guiding directives, the 5 goals that this kind of, which led to this very simple idea that as a church, we have assets, we have a foundation, we have a pension fund. And yes, we need those investments to make a return, to fund mission programs, to fund our church worker retirees and their retirement. But if we are a faith-based organization, shouldn't that capital also be trying to advance mission-related or values-based goals through the capital? So those are our five areas that, and really to this day, one can make an argument that all of our work flows through those 5 kind of umbrellas. In particular, which I'll talk about a little bit later, we're particularly working on the achievement of environmental responsibility due to the climate crisis that we're facing, and also the pursuit of racial justice. Next slide, please. Before that's perfect. And some of the kind of historic accomplishments that our committee has engaged in, or has kind of helped to bring about, is through working with ecumenical, faith-based investors, ecumenical community, values-based investors. The committee put pressure on companies to cut ties with the apartheid regime in South Africa, leading to its end. Encourage companies to increase their human trafficking prevention efforts. Led companies to end predatory lending practices, encourage companies to do better disclosure on environmental policies and practices, and improve human rights and supply chain transparency. Some of the tactics for implementation that we utilize are screening, or that is what we, as Nana mentioned, what we are kind of against, what we prohibit. Those include military-related companies that are engaged in weapons production, tobacco companies, for-profit prisons, companies that violate our human rights policy. And in 2018, we established our first ever environmental policy, which basically states that companies, we try to move companies towards compliance with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Second is shareholder advocacy, and that's where we really spend most of our time engaging with companies through dialogue, correspondence, occasionally shareholder resolutions, which is in the United States. Any shareholder that holds a specific amount of shares with the company for a period of time can make a proposal that is voted on by all the shareholders. And we utilize that tool quite frequently to move companies towards compliance with our standards set by our General Assembly. Occasionally, we go into more heavy-handed tactics, which can lead to vote against directors and occasionally shareholder litigation. The third kind of stool leg here is community investing or impact investing, which Nana was talking about a little bit. We have a program through our foundation that engages in this work, and we are looking forward to continuing to work on that. Next slide, please. And importantly, we do this all in large coalitions. We do this in community. Some of our biggest coalitions are the faith-based coalitions. Is the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, which the Presbyterian Church is one of the founding members of in 1971. Currently, it is comprised of Christian traditions, Jewish and Muslim traditions, as well as values-based managers. The total capital, if you bring all that together, all the membership together, is around $400 billion, which means that the faith-based community is a strong voice of witness and is a serious investor in a lot of these companies. We also are a member of Faith Invest, and happy to continue with that work. And we also work with a variety of values-based coalitions, the biggest of which is the Climate Action 100 initiative, which has about $40 trillion of assets under management behind it, which is trying to push the world's 100 biggest carbon emitters to compliance with the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Rob. And from investments, we move on to microcredit. Reverend Yusuf, could you let us know more about the Ate Kelang Foundation and how churches in Indonesia are working with communities to better lives through microcredit?
Thank you, Athena. Please share the screen. I will start to explain the context of Indonesia since 1985, where the program of credit union started by Ate Kelang Foundation, and until today, the case is still the same. Next screen, please. We can see these charts that Indonesian is inequality country number 4. This data is from 2016, but until today, I think it's still relevant and still not fixed yet. So Indonesia is a very, very long distance between poor people and rich people. Next slide, please. We can see also Gini ratio is too high, especially in the village level. In 2000, you can see the green charts, 2012, 0.3030, and 2019 is 0.3015. It's decreased, but it's very small. The Gini ratio is very high still in Indonesia. Next slide. And the number of poverty is decreasing, but in the macro level data only. In the macro level, the data is decreasing, but in the micro level, in the remote area, especially in the village, we do not get benefit. Even number of economic growth is increased, but in the village level, in the grassroots level, we do not feel that the growth of economy make people live in the prosperous situation. Next slide. In our context, maybe also in your context is the same. The most important things in life is that mutual trust with gender balance. The second one is capital. We must have a capital or money. And the third one is idea to create a business. And the fourth one is political awareness. And 5, we must have the result, product or service. I will be focused in number 2. In our life, we need to have capital or money. Next slide. Yak GBKP ministry. If I say Yak GBKP, it means that Ate Kelang Foundation. Yak GBKP ministry built a community-based microcredit in Indonesia as a facilitator. First, we build credit union, but after the credit union increase their capital, so we will register the community to the government and to be a cooperative. So you can see the symbol in the left side that Atekelang and credit union symbol and cooperative symbol in Indonesia. So we have now 170 groups. Next slide, please. YAG GBKP ministry mandate is based on the biblical text in Luke chapter 4, verse 18 and 19, and also Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. But you can see the underlined word, bring good news. I will focus in this word. Next slide, please. In YAG GBKP context, good news means not about money aid or subsidy or donation or donor or charity. In YAG GBKP context, good news means, next slide please, we perform by awareness raising of people through training and also education. And we also start with the first question is, what do we have? And then we organizing the community. And then we gather all the resources to build a bargaining position. And then we facilitate the community to build the supporting infrastructure need to make the economy grow. This is good news in our context. Next slide, please. I will show you one success story in a community. The name of the village is Gotong Royong. So we built credit union Gotong Royong. This community is very bad in economy after the flooding. After the flooding in 2003. After the flooding is occurred, next slide. So many people like church, institution, and also government giving the victims like donation, make a fundraising, and many charity, but we think it is not fully help. It is occurred in 2 years, but the economic of the community is not grow. And then Atekelang Foundation visit this village in 2005. Next slide, please. Then YAG GBKP organized the community and built a microcredit community from the resources they have. In 2005, only 40 members can join because many people also didn't trust to YAG, to Atekelang Foundation. Then we try to collect the money they have. And that time, we collect about 50 million rupiahs, or equal to 3,039 American dollars. Next slide. The saving and loan activities we did. Next slide, please. You can see in the church building and also in the Sunday school building. Before, previous slide. Yeah. And after 10 years, the community grow up, even in capital and also in members. This group increased 2015, about there are 650 members already joined together, and total asset is about 5 billion, or in dollar you can see in this slide. Next slide. And then they already have their own building. Now the total of groups assisted by Atekelang Foundation, 170, with total members about 45,000, and the total asset, you can see the slide, equal to $18,963,179 American dollars. Next slide. Okay, thank you. And now we run also new program. We call it Tigata. Next slide, please. This is digital marketing strategy, also community-based, to make a farmer always have a way to share their product, and this product we can bring directly to the house. So this Tigata also community-based marketing produced by this community. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Yusuf, for sharing those success stories. And now we would like to hear from Cynthia, this time to share about how the church can be an affirming space for the socioeconomically disenfranchised, including migrants. Cynthia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Athena. Before Ariana left for home, I'm still talking about Ariana here, in 2015, after the court hearing, she wanted to see the dean of the cathedral, who is the head of the cathedral, who at that time was in a clergy meeting. So with all apologies for barging in, we asked for a 3-minute break from them. For Ariana to say something to them because she was going home, she just said goodbye, and she said, I want to express what is in my heart. Even if I'm a Muslim, you did not hesitate to support me. Thank you all very much. That was that everyone is like, oh my God, this is something. The core principle of the mission for migrant workers is to empower the migrants, to enable them to address their urgent needs and problems encountered in their everyday as strangers in foreign land, as well as their long-term aspiration in reducing, if not completely eradicating, the real cost of forced labor migration. To ensure this, we developed our program under 2 streams, the service stream and advocacy stream, under which 6 programs are continuously implemented. We have like labor and employment assistance, pastoral care and social welfare. We have communication, research and information dissemination, and even women's initiatives towards empowerment. But we always say that service streams, service without advocacy or advocacy without service is useless. Okay? Service stream is the face-to-face, which is the more direct assistance that we provide from labor, immigration, police assistance, problems that are related to these. We connect them with legal advisors when necessary. We accompany them to meetings, to courts, hospitals, visit them in prison, and such and not the list. We provide temporary shelter through the Tun House. It's a refuge center. We assist almost 1,000 every year of migrant domestic workers, new cases, on top of other spillover of the previous years. Challenges come in the form of policies and laws, both in the country of destination that are targeting more and more, getting to be more and more restrictive, and country of origin that are very good at inventing more and more fees for migrant workers to pay. We call them state exaction. And policies that favor the business, which is the recruitment business. And governments pass on the responsibilities to private entities like the recruitment agencies. That's a challenge to us. And dealing with these challenges fall under our advocacy stream. So we do a lot of policy advocacy and social advocacy, but I'm dealing more with policy advocacy here because policy advocacy would be policy changes for the benefit of migrant workers. That means writing letters, submissions, position papers to the government of both Hong Kong, which is the work site, and that of the sending country. But it should not stop there, as many times they fall on deaf ears. So the mission finds way in which to raise migrant workers' voices to the wider global region and onto the international arena, such as lobbying of migrant domestic workers issues to the United Nations, and sending migrant workers themselves, representative of migrant organizations, to the ILO, which eventually passed the ILO Convention 189, recognizing domestic work as work. And they even have representatives going to the General Assembly. Now they speak for themselves. And here is the greatest challenge. Being in a church, the church may be sensitive to political issues. Separation of church and state, as I jokingly told one of the clergy friends, seems like a sort of Damocles. And that to avoid it, many times the church keeps quiet. And we're sure that there is that dilemma. The dilemma is there because anxiety of helping and in asserting rights of the underprivileged as against getting the ire of the government.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing the work of the Mission for Migrant Workers. Now from migrant workers, we move on to another another group of essential workers, and that would be our farmers, the peasants. So we would like to hear now from Pastor Kakay. Could you say something, share about the Lupang Ramos Agricultural Cooperative and how churches are supporting this cooperative, as well as the community's struggle for land rights?
Yes, Athena, I would love to. And I made a small video because I'm a bit chatty and I might spend all my 4 minutes doing intro. So let me just share my screen and show you this video instead. Okay, so can everyone see it?
When people ask me if I believe in the rapture, I say, yes. Why, you ask? Because in my country, people disappear almost every day. Thousands, mostly peasant leaders, student activists, community organizers, labor leaders, progressive church workers, have been extrajudicially abducted and continue to be abducted in my country. And I am sure this is true in your countries as well. Aside from people disappearing, the rapture also involves land. Over 100 years ago, Palestinians occupied over 90% of Palestine. Today, they occupy less than 6%. Over 100 years ago, over 90% of Mindanao in southern Philippines was occupied by Mindanaoans. Today, they occupy less than 6%. Andres Bonifacio, the father of the Philippine Revolution that ended 3 centuries of Spanish colonial rule in the Philippines, was executed on orders of Emilio Aguinaldo because Bonifacio advocated for genuine agrarian reform. When Aguinaldo was captured by the Americans in the early 1900s, the Americans gave him over 6,000 hectares of land in Central Luzon as a gift for his surrender. Fast forward to the 1990s, Philippine President Fidel Ramos's 5-province Calabarzon project converted thousands of hectares of prime agricultural land into industrial estates overnight, displacing and dispossessing over 35,000 farmers just in the province of Cavite. Today, in Cavite, Lupang Ramos is the last remaining tract of prime agricultural land in the entire province. And we at UTS stand with the farmers of Lupang Ramos because it is what Jesus would have done if he were here. That the powerful, the privileged, the propertied have been trying to get their hands on Lupang Ramos for over 3 generations now. But the farmers there have stood their ground. And their leader is Miriam. And every time we at UTS get the privilege to hear her, to talk with her, to pray with her, to work the fields with her, to go to court with her, to face our ground against state forces, we remember one of the oldest historical memories in the Hebrew Bible, Miriam, the prophet, the sister of Aaron. We are Aaron, we are priests, and we follow Miriam's lead.
Ang isang magandang balita dito sa amin ng mga seminarista ay yung ano ang kahalagahan o kombinasyon ng pananampalataya sa ginagawa namin mga pagsasaka. Kasi sa bahagi kasi namin, alam naman natin na itong sakahan ay bahagi ng kalikasan na nilikha ng Panginoon. Ngayon, yung isang pinakamagandang balita, kung paano pag-uugnayin ang pananampalataya sa aming pakikibaka at sa aming tuloy-tuloy na pagpapaunlad ng aming ekonomiya sa kasalukuyang sistema ng lipunan naman natin na tayo naman ay kami hindi binibigyan ng panahon ng ating lipunan. Kumbaga, kahit nga yung bilang dignidad namin bilang mga magsasaka, hindi naman kinikilala ng lipunan eh. Samantalang kami ang nagpapakain sa buong sambayan ng Pilipino. Sa buong sambayanan kami ang nagpapakain. Ngayon, mas naging mabuti ang aming gawa sa usapin ng pagsasaka sa bawat pagsambang bayan na ginagawa dito, sa bawat pag-aaral namin ng mga salita ng Diyos na may kaugnayan sa kung paano namin talaga paunlarin ang pagsasaka. Dahil yung lahat ng mga iniwang ng mga salita ni Jesus Christ, yung tungkol dun sa mga binhi, yung mga tungkol doon sa kanyang pagsasabog ng mga yung sa mga mustasa, mas nakaka-relate talaga kaming mga magsasaka doon. Ibig sabihin talaga, mas malapit sa puso ng Diyos ang sakahan. Ayun na, ano pa?
If any of the Filipinos here can translate Pagsambang Bayan better in English, I think it's people's worship. Is that the best translation? I think. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kakay. Thank you, everyone, for really sharing these rich, diverse, wonderful, and also really concrete examples of how we as a church can help transform local contexts and communities, and also be transformed by local contexts and communities, because you know, it's a two-way relationship here. We know that the road to an economy of life and ecological justice is not going to be an easy, straightforward path. And even though you have shared these beautiful examples, there must have been roadblocks. You know, the ride must have been bumpy. I don't know, there could have been craters along the way. So in this second round of sharing, we would like to hear about the challenges and how your organization or your initiative or your church or community was able to overcome them or is still striving to overcome them. And some of you have already touched on this. We would also like to hear how COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting your work, if at all. We would like to hear about some of the moments that particularly stood out for you and gave you rich sources of inspiration in the work. We would like to hear about some of the key lessons learned. And although we said that each of you have like 4 minutes, because we are a little bit over time now, if you could do it in less than 4 minutes, if you could do it in 2 to 3, we would be grateful for that. So again, Nana, would you like to start with this round of inputs?
Thank you, Athena. So just picking up on something that Cynthia said, that churches are often quiet. Sometimes churches also act quietly. And if I think about the challenges that we continue to work through, there are challenges of openness, where the institutions can be open about what they have, what they want to achieve. There are challenges of matching needs and wants. And then there are challenges of being patient. So being determined, but being patient to actually deliver what you want to get as an outcome. So if I come back, first of all, to the openness, I mean, money is often an awkward thing to talk about. People don't want to talk about their assets because they don't know how to talk about it to match to the responsibilities that they have to deliver on with those assets. And quite often when you get into these conversations, people assume that if I want to do good, I have to sacrifice a lot of financial return every single time. And quite often there are barriers of perceptions, actually is the word I'm looking for. Those are barriers of perceptions that you need to break. In the way that's the learning, I'll go straight to that just for this point. is that you have to build relationships. For us, it's all about building relationships with organizations one by one to really understand and to be a safe space where we can all talk and share together and not worry about the perceptions that will come when we're open about what we want to achieve. Second challenge is matching needs and wants. It's been interesting, especially in the time of COVID, and I'm sure we've all seen it. Many, many more projects are coming forward looking for faiths to invest in them. And very often those who want to invest are now also struggling to balance between their traditional responsibilities, how do I manage my pension fund, and their less traditional responsibilities, how do I choose what impact project to invest in. So just managing that balance between what's needed and what's wanted in terms of the need for money and the need for returns has been a challenge, and we continue to work through it. And we try to work with both sides, both with those who are coming forward with projects. Very specifically, we're putting up fund together, which we hope will help to blend some of those opportunities and put them in a way that those who are investors will be comfortable to invest knowing the impact they're going to have and also having some sense of the financial return they may gain. That's our approach to challenge too. As for the approach to managing patients, you just must learn to be patient. What I would tie that with though is moments of inspiration or where you see the scale of the ambition. For example, we're working with the Armenian church, one of our projects called Sacred Cities. And when you see the scale of what they're trying to do, which is number of different projects across numbers of different bits of infrastructure, really reviving a whole city, a whole space, a whole community, then you see the value of being patient and doing it piece by piece. And you manage the challenge of patience and you get inspired by the progress that you see. So I think the lesson is really understand from your peers, but understand you're also an individual organization. Be patient, but have the right level of ambition, because you can actually change the way that things work when you're prepared to kind of go through the steps of building up why you're doing what you're doing. Maybe I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Rob?
Thank you, Athena. And first of all, you pull up the PowerPoint really quickly. I'll try to run through these slides as quickly as I can. So one of the things that has really been a source of inspiration and also challenges for our committee is over the past 2 years, we have been working on looking at incorporating, addressing environmental racism through the lens of corporate engagement and social responsibility. This next slide, please. This comes from a directive from our General Assembly 2 years ago that really challenged the entire church, the entire Presbyterian Church, to listen to the perspectives and voices of people most impacted by environmental racism. This was not directed specifically to our committee, but our committee leadership felt it so important that we need to figure out a way how to incorporate this into our work and how to importantly institutionalize it. Next slide, please. So we began looking for communities that, and we worked through our structure, through the Presbyterian Church structure, to identify local leaders who were doing work with communities that were affected by climate change or by other types of environmental degradation by companies. Our first engagement was in South Louisiana in early 2019. Next slide, please. We did an engagement with the Pointe-au-Chien Indian tribe, which are sometimes referred to as some of the first climate refugees in the United States. Their ancestral land is disappearing through coastal erosion. It's something like a football pitch worth of land per day. And we did a lot of engagement with the issues that they were facing, and what they were wanting to do about it. And they noted the governmental challenges, especially at the state level, and really expressed the importance of their land and how they wanted to stay on their land as long as possible, and wanted to engage in that way. We also went, next slide please, to a cooperative in this is all that the Pointe-au-Chien was west of New Orleans in the United States. This is east of New Orleans in Plaquemines Parish, where, as you can see, there's some shipping boats. There was a thriving oyster industry, which has been wrecked through coastal erosion caused by climate change. The communities there, predominantly African American, are exposed to any time there is really a rainstorm. It used to be a hurricane, but now a strong rainstorm will flood their communities. And so we talked about how they are building their own resilience up to withstand that, and it's importantly to stay in their home. Next slide, please. We then did a trip to Detroit and Flint, Michigan later in 2019, engaged with communities there. Next slide, please. Some of you, I'm sure, are aware of the Flint, the Flint horrible situation there, where their water supply was basically poisoned due to corporate greed, local government greed. And we engaged with local community leaders and saw a screening of a documentary produced by the Presbyterian Church USA, which I certainly commend to you all. Next slide. We also spoke with a community in Southwest Detroit that was engaging with, or trying to engage with, Marathon Petroleum, which is a large refiner in the United States, and trying to, which is basically just poison their community, poison the air. People are, again, it's a predominantly African American neighborhood, and people are just, their health has been eviscerated, and it's causing harm, and they're trying to get the company to help them relocate. So we had these powerful stories and these powerful, next slide, please. And then it was the challenge of how to figure out how to evaluate that, how to incorporate that into our corporate engagement. So this slide is intentionally unreadable. If you want it, I can show you the website, but this shows how many criteria that we are evaluating companies on environmental, social, and governance issues. And next slide, finally, I'll show you how some of our community engagement work has been incorporated. We look at evaluating companies on social criteria, and specifically if their operations are negatively impacting their neighbors, marginalized, oppressed, historically marginalized, oppressed communities, often communities of color. It has given our highest priority weight. So these three kind of indicators have something that shows how we've kind of tried to institutionalize some of these experiences, which have been incredibly powerful, and gives us an ability to bring these stories and these voices directly to some of the most powerful corporate actors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob, for also sharing with us how PCUSA is also engaging with that burning issue of ecological racism. Yusuf, do you have something to share around challenges and sources of inspiration?
Thank you, Athena. I have not screen, but I will inform you that we have 3 points. The most challenges, or sometimes it is obstacle for our financial management in credit union or cooperative. The first one is loss of trust toward people, or loss of trust each other. It's the most obstacle in credit union or cooperative organization. The second one is the members do not understand the rule or the regulation. It is also harmful to make the credit union grow up. And the third one is the committee misuse money or misuse their position. We face 3 of these problems in a few of the target groups, and the problem is very, very difficult to overcome. But now we have a standard. We have standard to make the financial management can running well. I just remember that my professor, Bright Moudor, he also joined with us in this webinar. I'm very happy that he already teach us to have 5 principles of financial management. We call it ATSAP: accountability, transparency, security, accuracy, and punctuality. Now we use this standard to make the financial in our cooperative and also in the credit union will manage very well. And we also make some action to make sure that the members of the committee do not misuse the money, and we also say to them one sentence: in God we trust, in you we audit, in others we audit. So we do audit routinely every 6 months, every semester, to the target groups. And now we face also the problems of pandemic COVID-19. And the big problem we face in the community is for the micro level, the farmer and also trader is very difficult to sell their product. So we try to build a Tigata, digital marketing, to make the target of this marketing broader than before. Then the last, I would like to inform that in my experience, the lesson learned, I only see in our process is if members of credit union or cooperative trust each other and they keep the trust responsibly, the community will running well and grow up very fast. And for group like this, it's easy to make a social movement in many things, to struggle their right and others. They can also active to use the resources surrounding their place and also make it sustainable. I think that's all I would like to inform about obstacle and how do we overcome that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. And now I'm going to ask Cynthia to share about challenges and sources of inspiration.
Yes, I just have a few to add to what I have already mentioned earlier. One of which, especially in the times of COVID, is the policies that are coming out from the government of Hong Kong itself. It is as if the spreader of the COVID-19 are the foreign domestic workers, migrant domestic workers. They would come out with statements like, employers, please make sure that your domestic workers would not take their days off, which is not, which is unacceptable for a labor department to say that, you know. But it comes out that way, and also saying that if there's one, even just one victim of COVID, everyone would say, oh my God, these domestic workers really, they are the spreaders, and they have to be, you know, contained in one place. Even if they have already seen, or maybe they do not see, that in public places where thousands congregate during their days off, has now gone down to about just a few hundreds. And it's very difficult for the situation of migrant workers because there is the mandatory leave-in policy. And in the leave-in policy, they're not very strict in making sure that accommodation are really suited for or suitable for human beings. They sleep in the toilets, in cupboards, on top of refrigerators. You know, how can you rest during your rest day? Even mentally, you know, it's a challenge, the challenge for us. So we come out with good statements, making sure that these challenges are looking at not only, we're saying not only for domestic workers, but they should have policy for everyone, not you know, zeroing in on domestic workers. But apart from that, I'm sure, like any other non-governmental organizations, even those that are connected to churches like us, a big challenge for us. Resource mobility or resource mobility, yes, mobilization, or how do you really raise funding. And then in relation to that is developing leaders. This is a challenge for us because migrant workers are very mobile, very fluid. They're not the ones who are setting the rules for their stay in one place. It's the employer, it's the government policy, and these are challenges for us. One of the, of course, one of also the challenges is, I heard about patience. We're trying to be really patient in making good on how to mobilize good-hearted people to do something, even a small thing, because I think they're out there. It's just that they do not know what to do. So we're trying our best now to develop projects, programs that would enhance and invite them and encourage to do something for migrant domestic workers. One of which is the financial literacy program. This is that in relation to investment for migrant domestic workers back home to be able to be reunited with their families is a very big challenge and remains a challenge.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And now can we hear from Kakay?
Yes, thank you. The Farmers Organization in Lupang Ramos is the best seminary faculty council in the world. But beyond how they interpret parables and how they relate the struggle for land in the Bible stories that we read, accompaniment and deep solidarity have become the life force that binds us to them. This informs our pedagogical locus in the Field Education Office. When the Lupang Ramos Farmers Organization decided that they wanted Sunday worship, we in the seminary panicked. At church, in that community, did not fit any of our known denominational rubric. We asked the idiotic questions like, which among our sponsoring churches will have oversight? How do we assign pastors? Which bishop will be assigned to them? How will we fit in the bigger ideological framework? This community, after all, is in the midst of a long and bloody struggle for the right to farm this contested land. They are very organized. It felt then that the church, in the traditional sense, will just get in the way. I have another video of Nanay Miriam talking about how, as an organization, they decided to invite the seminarians of UTS to start Sunday worship services. There was a very simple reason behind it. According to her, it was a good environment for all of them to rest their minds and process the hardships that they endure on a daily basis. They needed the strength to keep fighting. So Sunday services involve our students taking turns coordinating service. The lectionary text is sent to them, to the community, on a Wednesday, and then they discuss it among themselves. And come Sunday, in lieu of a sermon, it is a discussion by groups. It became so effective that the students decided to give the farmers the lectionary readings for the next Sunday, so that they can write their sermons for their own church assignments elsewhere, based on the discussions in the Lupang Ramos Church. So the reason why services in Lupang Ramos are scheduled in the afternoons is not just because farmers work in the morning. It is also because pastors work in the morning, and the afternoon was the only time that we could meet. Our work with Lupang Ramos has blessed us in ways that I cannot fully articulate. We had a student who is now my colleague, Hazel. She's probably here in the call somewhere lurking. Wrote her thesis in the area of Christian education based on her experience with leading the church community in Lupang Ramos. One of her readers was Nanay Miriam, the woman in the video earlier. The entire Lupang Ramos Farmers Organization read and critiqued her thesis, and which was why she wrote it entirely in Tagalog, our national language, and showed up for her thesis defense. I have never seen such an excellent paper. And so many Christian education people, professors, were scandalized. I was so proud. Lupang Ramos urges us to confront and interrogate ourselves. We locate and assess ourselves in the light of our historical existence, missions, theologies, narratives, and intentions. The farmers of Lupang Ramos compel us to take sides, to be the church who will be unafraid to dissolve as salt in boiling water. Church can work quietly, yes, but we can also work loudly. And we must. In the streets, in the mountains, in the valleys, in contested farmlands, the seas, the lakes, city halls, trial courts. We must be there everywhere. I am a pastor by profession, and I am pastored by farmers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kakay. And again, it's going to be hard to summarize. And maybe let's. I'm sure that these powerful presentations that we've heard so far have raised some questions from our viewers. Again, Zoom, YouTube, Facebook. I will hand over to Annalise to moderate the Q&A session.
Hello, everyone. Many thanks to our wonderful speakers for sharing their expertise and experiences. Now we're going to open the panel up to questions from the audience. Please keep those questions coming in the chat box. We'll try to make it to as many as we can. So let's start off with some questions we received prior to the webinar. To review, I will bring 2 or 3 questions at a time to the speaker's attention, who can choose to answer all or some of them. I will also be posting these questions in the chat for your reference. Okay, for our first round of questions. Number 1, what are some key characteristics of an economy of life? And number 2, how might some of the strategies previously discussed by the speakers apply to the plight of Indigenous peoples around the world? So Robert has already spoke to some aspect of that question, but does anyone else in the speakers want to contribute how their organizations are working with Indigenous groups? Does anyone want to start us off?
Can I go?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. One time, our seminary hosted about 100 displaced Lumad. Lumad is the indigenous tribes from down south in Mindanao, and they were fleeing violence, and they came to Manila to appeal and call upon the government to help them. And so when they were here, when they arrived, the seminary took them in and gave them sanctuary. Union has a long history of solidarity work. Oftentimes, it gets us into a lot of trouble with the state, with everyone else. The plight of the indigenous peoples are what we say. They need to be surfaced more and talked about more because many of their struggles and their narratives reflect what is so wrong in this world, and the church must listen to them, must stand in deep solidarity with them.
Thank you so much, Kakai. That was great. So does anyone else want to jump in and address one of the questions? You can find them in the chat.
May I speak? Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Among migrant domestic workers, there would be like 15 to 20% indigenous people coming from the north of the Philippines, who are Igorots, and they're the most in number. There are also those who are coming from Mindanao, from down south. But among them, one of the things that they usually do would be reviving cultural practices, trying to make presentations of that. But one of the things that we thought could also be useful and helpful is when one of them or several people would ask about how migrant workers, while outside of the country, could help in the issues that are going on in their own provinces. There is war going on in some parts of the north. There are some of those who are what Kakai mentioned earlier about being killed without extrajudicial killings. All this are also issues that they raise and therefore are taken as issues being raised by organizations of migrant domestic workers and the church, because in Hong Kong, slowly there are church leaders and church goers who are coming together to support such issues.
Thank you so much for your response, Cynthia. Okay, so for the other speakers, would you like to weigh in on that first question? What are some key characteristics of an economy of life?
Yes, I would like to add something.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. I want to inform us that we build a credit union or we build a community organization, our target or our focus is not in money. Money is only the way or entry point to the people. So our focus target is for indigenous people. So we build a credit union, we also build a power. It means that if people in one organization, they have more powerful. So if there are a regulation from the government is not just, so we can struggle together to fight to the right of the people. So that is the target of the credit union community or a cooperative community. So we routinely do education and training about political and others. So I think if the first question, what are some key of economy of life? I think everything who make all the process of life in one community running well, and all people in the community live in welfare situation. I think if we work together each other and we need each other together, I think the economy life will running, and that is the key, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend. That was very insightful. Would anyone else like to weigh in on those questions, or should we move on to the next round of questions?
Annalise, I'd like to just touch on really quickly the economy of life question. Last year, I was fortunate enough to be a participant in the World Council of Churches sponsored government economics management GEM school for an economy of life, and got to just learn from incredible speakers and an incredible cohort from all over the world. And I had never really been, not too knowledgeable about the NFEA, the New International Financial Economic Architecture. Did I get that right, Athena? Yeah. Framework, the action plan. But that is pretty much a roadmap, you know, and I think a great frame of reference to kind of look at what we mean by economy of life from faith-based actors. And faith-based actors have a long history of influencing the broader society, and we tend to be the early adopters, the first movers, I think. And I really think there's another opportunity to do that now in this time of multiple pandemics, and not just the COVID-19, but also systemic racism and the global climate crisis. So I think there's a lot of things there I would like to see it in the United States, that framework proliferate more amongst churches and other faith-based actors.
Thank you so much, Rob. Okay, so I think we can move on to another round of questions. So for number one, the word alternative in the title of this webinar seems to imply some kind of competition or conflict with the state. If churches function as alternative economic actors in spaces, do you think there will be implications for their core mandate of proclaiming the gospel? How might these two actions interact? And then our second question. Churches in many areas of the world have access to and ownership of large tracts of land. What would you recommend to these churches so that people, especially the most marginalized, have more connection to and benefit from those pieces of land? Okay, so those are our two questions for the second round. Anyone can jump in and share their thoughts, and you don't need permission from me. So does anyone want to jump in?
Hey, Annalise, I just start to jump in on part one of those two questions, and the whole concept of alternative being against. Alternative is alternative. It's about bringing a different perspective together. It's not church against state and therefore church not able to proclaim the good news. I think most of us in one way or another have said that by the way that we act, by the way that we invest, by the way that our organizations are driven to make concrete changes on the ground, that is actually part of how we proclaim what we're about. And that, in a sense, is the alternative that we're trying to share. We're trying to work in the context of what exists So yes, we have to talk about money, but as you say, it's money as a means to something that matters to all of us. Money is a means to demonstrate what it is to love your neighbor, what it is to care for creation, if you like. So I think that alternative models are useful because they make us more aware of all of the stakeholders, as I said, not just the shareholders. And I think churches in particular and many faith institutions have the advantage of understanding from the top to the bottom, from the top of the institution who manages the pension fund to the bottom of the institution who manages the schools and the hospitals in the village on the ground when no one else will do it, when the state won't do it. So I think we need to understand our value and to be prepared to engage and to be prepared to, as Rob says, lead the way, because we pioneered a lot of these things before, we just haven't spoken about them.
Thank you, Nana. That was a great response. Does anyone else want to take a stab at that question? We could also address the second question posed by Dr. Manoj Kurian in the chat box regarding management of land.
One thing that I know that has happened in the Presbyterian Church USA, I think it was maybe 4 years ago, our General Assembly passed a recommendation that every time there's an official church meeting really, I think it's all levels of the church, but especially the national related levels, that there is a time to recognize whose land you were originally on. So and that is kind of an exercise in going back and looking up knowing that this land that we're on didn't always belong to the United States of America and kind of the dominant culture. It was indigenous land for thousands of years before. So that verbal recognition of, this is taking place on somebody else's land was a very important first step. What's come subsequently from there is that some churches have started conversations with local indigenous communities to if they own land or building or real estate, that they are in conversation to see if those people would benefit and in fact would want that land or want that property back. And it's kind of in its infancy, but there are some interesting stories, and the conversations are beginning that way. So.
Thank you so much, Rob. I think it's so important to understand who originally belonged to the land that we're living on. Does anyone else from the speakers like to address any of those questions?
Okay. Can I go? Okay. When I first heard of NIFIA, the NIFIA process, and the economy of life, my immediate thought was, this is the reign of God. And you shared this, Rob, in your Bible study in Gem School. And I would like to answer the alternative question with a parable, Jesus' parable of the mustard seed. And but I'll not, the parable of the mustard seed. But let me just quickly cite this. This is an encyclopedic entry, actually, of the Roman author Pliny the Elder, who was a contemporary of Jesus, and who describes the mustard plant. In his work, he says, mustard, with its pungent taste and fiery effect, is extremely beneficial for the health. It grows entirely wild, though it is improved by being transplanted. But on the other hand, once it has been sown, it is scarcely possible to get the place free of it, as the seed, when it falls, germinates at once. The mustard seed will overwhelm your garden. The mustard plant will overturn and overtake everything else. And this is perhaps the alternative that we speak of. The alternative is, I'm a New Testament person, so I have to talk like this, I think. It will occupy, and I think we should allow it. And if we can't help it, we get out of the way. Thank you.
Thank Thank you so much, Kakai, for sharing that parable with us. So I think that's all the time we have for the question and answer session. And now I would like to invite all the speakers to share some concluding thoughts. What would you like the audience to take away from this webinar? We've talked about so much, but what would you like to give to them in terms of words of inspiration? I think I'll invite Nana to start first.
Yes, I think all I would say is that everybody who's listened will have had something that has prompted them to think about something that was already in their mind. So don't delay, take action on whatever's been prompted and carry it forward. Even if today was about investment, but you're prompted to do something about your environmental commitments, do that, but do something. That would be my message.
Thank you. Rob, would you like to share some last thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to everybody today. Again, as I mentioned, I think, we're at a very opportune moments in the history of our society to kind of renegotiate our social contract. And I think faith leaders and faith-based communities can lead the way. And we just discussed a variety of ways today. And I really agree with Nana saying, we can all take something away to do something related to this work. And I really would encourage, especially for those that feel like there's no connection between faith and finance or faith and money, that there is definitely one, and it's an important one, and it really affects all of our lives. So to really be more comfortable with that intersection. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now on to Reverend Yusuf. Do you have any words of wisdom you would like to share with the audience? Hello, were you able to hear me?
Sorry, sorry, yes. Thank you. The things we need to know, I think, first is our community, especially in my context, my experience, there are many resources, not only knowledge of people, tacit and explicit, but also nature resources. And we can manage it productively if we have capital or money. Three things. I want to close this with three things we need to remember. First, without capital, we cannot build a business and use the resources. The second one, without knowledge, we don't know how to build a business sustainably. And the last one, our business can create money, save the environment, and make sure the sustainability of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend. Cynthia, would you like to share some quick thoughts?
Again, I would say the church needs to address how to be true to its faith. And that could be answering also the question on alternative. Will there be a conflict with the state? I think so. It would have one if the church should really lead its faith. One that helps to pave the way for marginalized people to gather its strength in number, muster their courage to assert their rights, allowing them to understand how and where they stand in a given situation as an individual, as a sector, to see themselves in relation with other individuals and supportive sectors of the society. And the church should be one of these sectors. It can start in small ways. I mentioned a little bit of that earlier. If you find good-hearted people in the church, come and find ways of making them work. Maybe they can give their free time, expertise, like free legal advice, free financial literacy, etc. And by the way, I would like to finish Ariana's case. Ariana was offered a scholarship by a prestigious Jesuit-run university in Yogyakarta, Sanata Dharma University. And she finished her 4-year course cum laude. And more, she came to Hong Kong last year to do a year's internship with a mission. There's hope. There's so much hope in the church, except that they have to stand their faith, which I challenge. And I think if they do that, they will really have a conflict with the state.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing. That was great. Kakai, would you like to finish us off with some last thoughts?
Yes, thank you. For all of us listening in, all the documents that the WCC write about economic economy of life, everything that was sent to you via email and the links that are provided here. I know that they're thick and but read through them. Read through them like it's like scripture. Read through them and pray every day. We are called to take sides, and most of the time, this will put us in the opposite side of those who are more powerful. But we are Christians for a reason, and the reason is that we follow the crucified Christ. Will we die in the process? Maybe. Some of us here might. I might. But we are promised resurrection. So let us not be afraid. Let us stand with those whose hope is only in God. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, really. On behalf of the WCC and all of those who have helped to organize this webinar series, I really would like to express my deep gratitude to all of you, Nana, Rob, Yusuf, Cynthia, and Kakai, for sharing your passions, experiences, and insights with such honesty and joy. Thank you for affirming that there is a rainbow of possibilities out there that can enable churches to be authentic in their own economic life and beyond. Thank you for reminding us that transformation has to happen at all levels. And if there are going to be long-lasting impacts, we also have to address financial structures and economic structures and outcomes. And so I quote from the roadmap very quickly. It says, though important, lifestyle changes are not enough. And when we begin to implement changes in our spaces, our voice promoting systemic change in the broader sense will carry more credibility. And whether we call it advocacy or prophecy, we need to push our governments to enact national and international policies that will support just and sustainable ways of living. And we refer you to the NIFEA, or the New International Financial and Economic Architecture, which some of our friends here have also spoken about. Annalise, if you could quickly invite our participants to the last webinar.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much again to all of our speakers for sharing your experiences. Thank you also to our audience on Zoom and Facebook Live for your questions, and those watching the recording on YouTube. So I invite you all to register to attend the next webinar in the series, which is also the last. The webinar is titled Powered by Faith, Churches Promoting Renewable Energy and Climate Protection, and it will take place next Tuesday, August 18th. We look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you so much. And to close, may I ask the Right Reverend Arnold Temple to give us a brief prayer. I hope he is with us.
Let us pray. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let us pray. In your Son, Jesus Christ, you promised fullness of life to the world. Help us to use the resources that you have provided us to transform the economy of our world so that we find fulfillment in your kingdom. Bless us this day and forevermore. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you also to those who are watching on YouTube and Facebook.
Thank you.